Hello and welcome to another Brexit Explained video. In this one we're going to discuss the relatively new alliance between Remain parties and MPs, known as Unite to Remain. We're going to look at who's involved, what they're hoping to achieve, and why an alliance like this is really necessary. Before we do though, I wanted to remind you about our podcast. We released a new episode over the weekend where we talk about the ongoing election, as well as briefly discussing our recent visit to 10 Downing Street. We'll explain the visit further in another episode later this week, so be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you're interested. There's a link in the description to our website where we have a full list of where you can find the podcast, or you can just search for Too Long Didn't Read in your podcast app of choice. Unite to Remain is an alliance made up of Liberal Democrats, the Green Party and Plaid Cymru. All of our regular viewers will be very used to the Lib Dems, and their policy to not only delay or change Brexit, but to cancel it altogether. They are very pro-EU, and they want as many Remain MPs in Parliament as possible to try and stop Brexit from happening. The Green Party are possibly most associated with environmental issues, but they're also pro-EU, so joining the alliance to try and stop Brexit makes sense. And finally there's Plaid Cymru, who are a Welsh party who also reject Brexit. Essentially the idea here is that all three parties come together to try and prevent them from splitting the Remain vote. This electoral alliance between the Lib Dems, Green and Plaid was first tested a few months ago in the BRECON and RADNORSHIRE by-election, which is a topic we actually made a separate video on. They worked together, with the Greens and Plaid not fielding their own candidates, instead backing the Lib Dem candidate. The plan worked and the Lib Dems won the seat, so the parties have gone ahead and are trying to do the same thing again across the country at the upcoming general election. Now before we go ahead with this topic, I'm going to explain to some of our non-UK viewers how the electoral system works in the UK and why electoral pacts are such a fundamental part of our system. So basically the UK uses an electoral system called first past the post. This means that the UK is split up into 650 constituencies, which each have one MP which represents them in Parliament. In each constituency, the MP which has the most votes wins. They don't need a majority, just the most votes. This is why an electoral pact is such a big deal. The risk is that without an alliance like this, Remain voters could end up getting split, with some Remain supporters voting Plaid, some Lib Dems and others Green. For example, imagine that the whole of the UK, and in one constituency particularly, 50% of the voters want to remain and the other 50% want to leave. And at the same time, the Remain parties can't agree on an electoral alliance. At a general election, the results in each constituencies go that 30% of the vote goes to the Conservatives, 20% to the Brexit Party, 17% to Labour, 18% to the Lib Dems, and 15% to the Greens. In this case, the Conservatives win the seats, despite only 50% of the country wanting to leave, and only 30% voting Conservatives. However, if the Lib Dems and Greens had formed an electoral alliance, meaning they only fielded one candidate, the Lib Dem Green candidate would have got 33% of the vote, and would have ended up beating the Conservative. This is obviously only a semi-realistic example, but it does highlight one major issue with the first past the post system. In both cases, people are voting the same way, but in one we end up with a Conservative Leave result, and the other we end up with a Lib Dem Green Remain result. This eventually leads to tactical voting, where people don't vote for their favourite party, but for a compromise party which they believe has the most chance of winning. Anyway, up until this point, this has been a major issue for both Leavers and Remainers. The Brexiteer vote is currently split between the Brexit Party and the Conservatives, and the Remainer vote is split between the Lib Dems, Greens, and maybe even Labour. Both sides are worried that this will end up hurting their chances at a general election, which is why both sides have flirted with the idea of forming an electoral coalition. In fact, Nigel Farage said that he was open to a Brexit Party Conservative coalition, but ultimately it didn't work out. He proposed an official Conservative Brexit Party pact, but the Conservatives pretty resoundingly rejected the idea, with many in the party saying that they'd never support anything which could help Farage gain power, saying that he wasn't suitable to rule. So the Conservatives rejected the offer, but it didn't stop Farage from worrying about splitting the vote. He spent years campaigning for Brexit, and he clearly doesn't want to see his work slip down the drain, alongside his career. So the Brexit Party announced that they wouldn't stand MPs in any constituency that the Conservatives currently held. While not a formal coalition or pact, Farage's move to stand down MPs that could steal seats from the Conservatives definitely helps the Leave cause. On the Remainer side, the Lib Dems, Greens, Plaid and other Remainer independent MPs have decided to form an electoral alliance called Unite to Remain. Crucially, it's worth noting that this pact doesn't include Labour, a party who are broadly anti-Brexit, preferring to go for a second referendum than follow Johnson's deal. Unite to Remain was actually started by Heidi Allen. Allen started as a Conservative MP, but then resigned to form Change UK, and then eventually just decided to sit as an independent. She spent ages trying to get Remain parties to form an alliance, and she'll be part of Unite to Remain herself. Originally, Unite to Remain was meant to include the Scottish National Party too, but since they've been polling pretty strongly in Scotland, they've decided that they're going to do it alone and try and pull in Remain voters for themselves. However, even though they aren't officially part of the pact, the SNP are definitely still a pro-EU party, and would very likely work with other parties who are also trying to stop Brexit. So Unite to Remain can still likely rely on the SNP's support, even though they're not formally part of the alliance. As we said at the beginning of the video, the Unite to Remain alliance was first tested in the BRECON and RADNORSHIRE by-election at the beginning of August. And in that election, thanks to the alliance, the Lib Dems won. We say thanks to the alliance because they won by a very narrow margin of about 1,400 votes. It's pretty clear that if the Remain vote had been split between Plaid, the Lib Dems and Greens, it's unlikely that any of them would have beaten the Conservatives, who got 39% of the vote and had held the seat since 2015. Anyway, after the success in BRECON and RADNORSHIRE, the Unite to Remain alliance have tried to continue their strategy across the country. The official list of MPs was announced a few months ago, with Unite to Remain choosing to support specific MPs across England and Wales. This meant that the Green Party stood aside to support 40 Lib Dem MPs in England, and in return the Lib Dems lent their support to the Green Party in 9 seats. In Wales, the Lib Dems were allowed free run in 3 seats, the Green Party in 1, and Plaid would run in 7 constituencies. This means that the Electoral Alliance could make a massive difference in the next general election. However, it might be harder than it seems to get enough MPs elected in order to stop Brexit. A Remainer Electoral Alliance is always going to work best in either Remain seats, or seats which are split pretty evenly between Leave and Remain. And these are the sorts of seats that they'll probably target. However, these are typically Labour and not Conservative seats, which means they'll probably gain most of their seats from Labour, when really, if they want to stop Brexit, they'll need to take some seats away from the Conservatives. For the Remain alliance to successfully take away seats from the Conservatives, they'll need 2 things to happen. Firstly, they'll need the Brexiteer vote to be split pretty evenly between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party. And secondly, they'll need Labour to perform particularly badly at this general election. But will either of those things happen? Well, Labour have been polling pretty poorly, not doing too well in any recent local elections or by-elections, and the Brexiteer vote will be split between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party in the constituencies where they're both running. The Conservatives are currently looking very strong though, polling at about 41%. Their main competition for the Brexiteer vote, the Brexit Party, were at one point ahead of the Conservatives and polling at about 25%, but are now languishing at 6.3%. These polling results show that it might be enough for the Conservatives to beat both the Unite to Remain alliance and the Brexit Party. But again, this might change. Brexiteer voters have already shown that they're not particularly loyal to any party, and are happy to move to the party which offers them the form of Brexit which they like most. This is why the Brexit Party were able to poll so well a couple of months ago. Brexiteer voters ditched the Conservatives pretty quickly, when a more pro-Brexit option was available. So if Johnson messes up, the Brexiteer vote might become more evenly split. Basically, lots of things could happen, but no one knows exactly what will. What the Unite to Remain alliance clearly does realise is that working together, they have the best shot at getting Remain MPs in Parliament. With the Lib Dems' recent surge in the polls, they might have a better shot than ever before at getting the kind of Brexit they want. However, they do still trail behind the Conservatives and Labour by some margin. If Labour had joined a movement like this, it could have been even more successful. But even in the constituencies where Unite to Remain have negotiated just 1 pro-EU MP rather than 2 or 3, they're still up against Labour. This means that the Remain vote will still likely be split between Labour and the Unite to Remain party, potentially handing the win to the Conservatives. Anyway, we'll have to see how this ends up playing out on election night. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want more updates on Brexit and the election as they play out. You can also hit the bell icon if you want to be notified every time we release a video. And you can find more from us across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And finally, if you want your name featured at the end of the videos, just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.